Have you ever wondered what happens when an arrogant suit tries to unplug a ticking time bomb without realizing who holds the detonator? I sat there, watching my new boss brag about system optimization on a live broadcast, right before I smiled, held up my resignation letter, and let him burn a $14 million contract to ashes. Welcome to the most expensive lesson corporate America ever paid for crossing the wrong person. Hello to all our amazing listeners tuning in to Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget to keep operating at our usual capacity. If you enjoy today's story and want to support our work, please consider joining our Patreon channel where you can listen to exclusive, even more incredible true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors, bringing the drama to life. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now grab a drink and settle in, because it is time to start today's story and introduce you to our architect of vengeance, Lila Sanchez. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was the data security architect at Vortex Meridian. If you have never heard of Vortex Meridian, imagine a sprawling, soulless cloud infrastructure management corporation based out of a glass and steel monolith in Denver. In a building packed with slick talkers and middle managers who justified their salaries with colorful pie charts, I was the quiet, cold ghost haunting the server floors. I did not do office politics. I did not attend mandatory fun hour on Fridays. I built digital fortresses, and I was the undisputed backbone of the entire operation. My crown jewel, and the only reason the executive board tolerated my antisocial tendencies, was Apex Medical. Apex was a healthcare giant, a massive conglomerate that pumped $14 million in revenue into Vortex Meridian every single year. Dealing with medical data is not a game. It requires a level of paranoia that most normal people cannot comprehend. I was the only person in the entire company who held the highest level security clearance required to manage their infrastructure. I personally maintained the firewalls, the intricate permission systems, and the multi-layered encryption protocols that kept thousands of patient records safe from hackers. I kept the beast breathing, and for a long time, there was a fragile peace. That peace shattered the day the board decided we needed a new chief operating officer. Enter Vance Sterling. Vance was a former executive from a venture capital firm, a man who looked like he was genetically engineered in a lab to wear a tailored suit and fire people with a patronizing smile. He was brought in with a very specific, ruthless mandate: cut costs and maximize profits at any human expense. From day one, Vance carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who read one article about artificial intelligence and suddenly believed he was a tech visionary. He brought a ruthless business mindset that treated security like an unnecessary luxury. His grand vision involved replacing experienced, seasoned engineers with cheap, unproven AI tools and pushing all of our critical vetting processes overseas to the lowest bidder. To Vance, my strict, meticulous security protocols were not the shield protecting the company from federal lawsuits. To him, they were just the conservative hindrance of an obsolete mindset. It did not take long for his destructive philosophy to trickle down into my department. He started looking for loopholes in our standard operating procedures, obsessed with showing immediate, inflated results to the board of directors. He would storm into my team's workspace, smelling of expensive cologne and misplaced arrogance, demanding that we push updates faster. "You are creating bottlenecks, Lila," he told me during one particularly grating morning stand-up. "We need agility. Skip the secondary encryption checks on the staging servers. The board wants to see a 20% increase in deployment speed by Friday, and I am not going to let your paranoia slow down our progress." He was effectively ordering us to bypass basic security measures just to report fake, accelerated progress metrics to the shareholders. My team looked at me, panic in their eyes, knowing that skipping those steps on healthcare data was a direct violation of federal compliance. Any other manager might have screamed. They might have gone straight to human resources, or threatened to quit, or engaged in a fiery screaming match in the middle of the open plan office. But I did not. I knew exactly how men like Vance operated. If I complained, I would be labeled as difficult. I would be managed out, and he would replace me with someone compliant enough to let him burn the company to the ground. So instead of arguing, I nodded. I gave him a tight professional smile and told him we would adjust our workflows to align with his new vision. Then, I walked back to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. I quietly initialized an independent military-grade encrypted hard drive. Over the next few weeks, while Vance was busy patting himself on the back for streamlining the department, I became a digital hoarder. Every single time he sent an email demanding we bypass a security protocol, I saved it. Every time he issued a forced directive to skip a compliance step, I backed it up. Every arrogant Slack message, every reckless decision, and every single shred of evidence proving his blatant violation of industry compliance was meticulously sorted, date-stamped, and locked away in that drive. Vance thought he was optimizing a system. He had no idea he was just handing me the rope I would eventually use to hang his entire career. The breaking point did not arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a screaming match. It arrived as a silent, glowing red notification on my secondary diagnostic monitor. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my security sweeps flagged a massive, anomalous authorization node. I traced the incoming Internet Protocol address, fully expecting to find a minor routing glitch. Instead, I stared into a gaping, terrifying hole in our perimeter. Vance had unilaterally granted root-level access to Apex Medical's most sensitive data clusters to a third-party vendor located 8,000 miles away. He had completely bypassed my entire security vetting matrix. He skipped the mandatory background checks, ignored the endpoint encryption verifications, and entirely disregarded the secure tunneling protocols, all just to hire a discount tech farm that charged $12 an hour. I marched straight up to the executive suite and let myself into his corner office. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Denver skyline, a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute disaster he was actively creating inside our network. I slammed the printed access logs down onto his polished mahogany desk. I did not raise my voice, but the venom was thick in my throat. I explicitly detailed how handing unvetted offshore contractors direct pipelines to unmasked patient records was a catastrophic violation of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. I explained, using small, deliberate words so he could not possibly misunderstand, that a single data breach would trigger severe federal investigations, mandate millions of dollars in immediate fines, and result in the instantaneous termination of our $14 million contract. Vance did not even look at the logs I had placed in front of him. He simply leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair, steepled his fingers together, and offered me a condescending smirk that made my blood run absolutely cold. "You are entirely too close to this, Lila," he sighed, utilizing the exact tone of a tired parent explaining basic arithmetic to a stubborn toddler. "You are looking at this situation through the narrow lens of a paranoid technician. I am looking at the macroeconomics. We are mandated to streamline overhead by 40% this quarter. That requires dynamic, aggressive solutions, not bureaucratic roadblocks wrapped in your regulatory paranoia." "It is not paranoia, Vance. It is federal law," I snapped back, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of his desk. He clicked his tongue, a sharp, incredibly dismissive sound. "Well, since you are clearly too stressed by this operational shift to see the bigger picture, I am officially relieving you of direct oversight on the Apex migration. You will focus your energy on legacy maintenance from now on. I need agile team players on the front line, not constant doomsayers." With a casual wave of his manicured hand, he stripped me of my own project. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect was suffocating. I had built that architecture with my bare hands, and he was treating me like a disposable intern. But the private insult in his office was nothing compared to the public humiliation he had planned for later that week. 2 days later, Vortex Meridian held its mandatory all-hands company meeting. Over 400 employees were crammed into the main auditorium, with hundreds more dialing in remotely from their cubicles. The air conditioning was struggling against the body heat, making the room thick, stale, and oppressive. Vance took the center stage, pacing back and forth under the bright theatrical spotlights like a motivational speaker selling a fraudulent pyramid scheme. His massive presentation was titled, "Security Automation, the Lean Future." For 20 agonizing minutes, he bombarded the captive room with a continuous stream of empty corporate buzzwords. He talked extensively about synergizing operations, leveraging cloud elasticity, and most tellingly, aggressively trimming redundant human capital. He painted a grand picture of a futuristic corporate utopia where artificial intelligence and automated scripts handled our data security. He heavily implied, without ever saying my name out loud, that highly paid engineers who demanded rigorous testing and strict compliance were nothing but dead weight dragging the company profit margins down. Every single word he spoke was a thinly veiled attack on my department, a very public declaration to everyone in the building that my expertise was an overpriced liability. Then, the schedule dictated it was my turn. As the lead data architect, I was required to deliver the quarterly risk assessment. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusted the microphone, and clicked my presentation remote to pull up my first slide. It was a stark, highly detailed, data-driven heat map highlighting the severe, critical vulnerabilities introduced by his new offshore vendors. I took a deep breath and began to speak, outlining the unacceptable network latency and the entirely unsecured entry points that were currently sitting wide open on the Apex network. I barely managed to get through my second sentence before the sound died completely in my throat. Literally. My microphone went completely dead. I tapped the metal mesh cover, the dull acoustic thud echoing weakly only to the front rows, but absolutely nothing transmitted through the main speakers. I looked back over my shoulder toward the control booth. The sound technician offered a panicked, helpless shrug, pointing a trembling finger down at the side of the stage. Vance was standing directly beside the master audio console. He had deliberately cut my microphone feed. "Thank you for that incredibly thorough, if slightly pessimistic introduction, Lila," Vance boomed into his own wireless headset microphone, his amplified voice easily overpowering the sudden, awkward silence in the room. He confidently pressed a button on his own remote clicker. The giant projection screen behind me, which was supposed to be displaying my critical threat analysis, violently flickered and instantly switched to a massive, brightly colored graphic of his own design. It was a ridiculous, cartoonish rocket ship flying aggressively upward alongside a bold line graph showing skyrocketing profit margins. I stood completely frozen at the podium, my face burning hot as the humiliating reality of his ambush fully set in. But Vance was not finished driving the knife in. He took 3 large steps into the exact center of the stage, intentionally positioning his body to block me from the audience's view. "To truly embrace this incredibly lean future," Vance announced, his voice echoing triumphantly off the acoustic wall panels, "we must immediately transition our administrative architecture to a more global, highly responsive 24/7 model. Therefore, effective immediately, the primary administrative rights and root command functions for the Apex medical infrastructure have been successfully migrated to our new global partner team." A heavy, utterly suffocating silence violently crashed down over the entire auditorium. 400 pairs of wide, shocked eyes shifted rapidly from Vance's smiling face over to me, standing uselessly in the shadows. He had actually done it. He had taken the master keys to the kingdom. He had taken the very system I had meticulously built from scratch, the system I had coded line by agonizing line over 4 long years, and he had gleefully handed the master controls over to a room full of underpaid, unverified strangers on the exact opposite side of the planet. I was no longer the lead architect. I was not even a security guard anymore. Right there, trapped under the blinding stage lights in front of every single peer I had, Vance Sterling had officially and deliberately reduced me to a completely powerless puppet trapped inside my own digital fortress. I did not storm out of the auditorium. I did not run to the restroom to cry in a locked stall, nor did I draft a furious, emotionally charged email to the Human Resources Department. I simply gathered my notebook, walked calmly out the double doors, and returned to my desk in the now entirely empty Information Technology Department. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect reflection of my own internal state. I was not angry anymore. Anger is a volatile, sloppy emotion that leads to unforced errors and careless mistakes. Instead, a profound, icy clarity had taken over my mind. Vance had made his move, a highly theatrical, aggressive strike meant to assert his absolute dominance over the corporate hierarchy. Now, it was time for me to check the board and arrange my pieces. I logged into my secure terminal, bypassed the standard corporate intranet entirely, and accessed my personal, offline digital vault. It required a physical token insertion and a complex 32-character biometric passphrase to open. From the deeply nested, hidden folders, I extracted a single, heavily encrypted portable document format file. It was the original master service agreement I had personally negotiated and signed with Apex Medical exactly 4 years ago. This document was not the glossy 10-page executive summary that got passed around the boardroom on Friday afternoons. This was the master technical addendum, a dense, brutally dry legal document stretching well over 400 pages. Hidden deep within Section 47, buried under absolute mountains of federal compliance jargon and strict liability waivers, was a highly specific provision designed specifically for the absolute worst-case scenarios in healthcare data security. It was titled the Key Custodian Clause. In the highly regulated realm of medical infrastructure, a client does not just trust a faceless corporation, they trust the architect. The data Apex Medical housed was so sensitive, containing the private health records of millions of citizens, that federal regulations required a physical, air-gapped encryption key to validate any master administrative changes on the network. And I was the named, legally bound key custodian. I was the singular human being on the planet authorized to possess that physical key. Not the chief executive officer, not the new chief operating officer, and certainly not an unvetted offshore team working for $12 an hour. Me. This key was not a password. It was not a simple string of text you could casually copy and paste into a corporate email. It was a physical, cryptographic hardware token, a solid piece of heavily encrypted metal that the entire digital infrastructure of the hospital network was fundamentally tethered to. When Vance proudly announced to the entire company that he had migrated the root command functions to his cheap global team, he fundamentally misunderstood how the system was built. He honestly thought he had just handed them the keys to the castle. In reality, he had just commanded them to ram their heads repeatedly against a reinforced steel door. The key custodian clause was written with the ruthless, unforgiving precision of a loaded weapon. It explicitly stated that if the designated custodian was ever forcefully removed from their position, had their administrative rights involuntarily revoked, or formally resigned from the company, the entire database architecture would instantly and irrevocably trigger a total zero-trust lockdown protocol. The system was strictly programmed to recognize any sudden, unauthorized administrative shift as a hostile domestic data breach. It did not matter if the new administrators were hired by Vortex Meridian. To the automated firewall, they were unauthorized intruders. Every single digital pathway, every server cluster holding patient histories, and every data pipeline routing medical records would violently and entirely shut down. The system would freeze into solid digital ice, demanding the physical insertion of my master key to authorize a restart. But the true beauty, the absolute poison pill hidden deep in the legal text, was the financial repercussion. If a zero-trust protocol was triggered due to corporate negligence or unauthorized tampering of the administrative hierarchy, Apex Medical retained the absolute, unchallengeable legal right to terminate their entire contract with Vortex Meridian effective immediately. There was no mandatory 30-day grace period. There were no breach of contract penalties. They could walk away free and clear, taking their $14 million in annual revenue with them. Vance Sterling had absolutely no idea this clause even existed. I knew exactly how he operated. Men like Vance did not read 400-page technical addendums. They read the one-page financial summaries. They looked at the profit margins, the quarterly projections, and the bottom line. He saw the massive revenue Apex brought in, and he saw my department as a bloated, unnecessary expense. He was so incredibly eager to prove his worth to the board by cutting overhead that he had completely ignored the foundational architecture of the contract itself. He had just locked the steering wheel of a speeding car, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the only person in the vehicle holding the brakes. I opened a new text document on my screen and began to type. I did not write a sprawling manifesto. I did not complain about the toxic work environment or Vance's spectacular arrogance. I wrote a perfectly polite, entirely standard, 2-paragraph resignation letter. I stated my name, my official title, and my immediate departure from the company. But I did not stop there. A sniper does not just load the gun, they carefully measure the wind. I needed an unimpeachable witness to ensure Vortex Meridian could not legally cover up what was about to happen. Using an encrypted proxy server, I reached out to a senior investigator at a highly respected federal regulatory compliance agency. They were an independent government auditing firm that specialized exclusively in catastrophic healthcare data breaches and regulatory oversight. I simply filed a formal, highly prioritized request for a secure official legal custodian to be physically present for a high-level hardware asset handover later that week. I framed the request as a mandatory compliance audit for a departing executive, ensuring every single step of the transition was documented entirely by the book. The trap was not just set, it was mathematically, legally, and procedurally perfect. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the drafted resignation letter on my glowing monitor, and waited for Vance to schedule his own execution. For the next 14 days, I became the absolute textbook definition of a defeated, subservient corporate drone. The art of the perfect ambush relies entirely on the target believing they have already won, and I played my part flawlessly. Whenever Vance strolled through the engineering department, projecting his aura of unearned superiority, I kept my eyes fixed firmly on my monitors. I nodded politely during his mandatory daily check-ins. I responded to his patronizing emails with standard, completely emotionless corporate affirmations. Yes, Vance. I understand, Vance. I will prioritize the legacy maintenance immediately, Vance. He absolutely soaked it up. His ego, already massively inflated, swelled to the point of pure delusion. He genuinely believed his public show of force in the auditorium had permanently broken the stubborn, difficult engineer. He thought he had tamed the dragon. Behind my mask of perfect obedience, I was meticulously and systematically wiping my entire existence from the Vortex Meridian servers. I ran advanced, military-grade digital shredding algorithms across my local drives, permanently deleting every single personal file, every customized script, and every specialized diagnostic tool I had built over the years. I organized the remaining mandatory folders with chilling precision, preparing for a handover so agonizingly perfect and compliant that no internal auditor could ever find a single flaw in my methodology. I packed my few personal desk items, a customized mechanical keyboard, a framed architectural print, and a high-end titanium coffee thermos, into a small cardboard box that I quietly stowed in the trunk of my car after hours. Vance, meanwhile, was entirely consumed by his own impending glory. He could not just quietly transition the workflow and claim the cost savings on his quarterly report. He desperately needed a monument to his own visionary leadership. To launch his new automated era, he scheduled a massive, high-definition live webinar. The event was aggressively marketed internally as the dawn of agile security. In a display of truly breathtaking corporate hubris, he not only mandated the attendance of the entire Vortex Meridian Executive Board, but he also explicitly invited the senior leadership and technical directors from Apex Medical. He wanted to show them live, right on camera, how effortlessly his newly outsourced global team could take complete control of their $14 million infrastructure. The morning of the highly anticipated broadcast finally arrived. The office air was thick with that frantic, artificial energy that always precedes a major corporate presentation. I sat at my remarkably empty desk, sipping a cup of black tea, and opened a highly secured, heavily encrypted anonymous mail client. I meticulously drafted a single subjectless email directed exclusively to the private, direct inbox of the Chief Legal Officer of Vortex Meridian. The legal director was a notoriously vicious, risk-averse shark who viewed every operational change as a potential federal lawsuit. To this email, I attached a cleanly highlighted, non-editable copy of the Master Technical Addendum. I drew a bright digital circle around page 342, specifically highlighting the impenetrable legal boundaries of the key custodian clause. I set the automated server relay timer to deliver the message at exactly 8:55 in the morning, precisely 5 minutes before Vance was scheduled to press the broadcast button. Down in the digital trenches, the structural integrity of Vance's grand vision was already beginning to fracture. In the shared corporate communication channels, his brand-new $12 an hour offshore team began frantically posting critical error logs. I watched the encrypted chat window with cold, calculated fascination. Migration sequence halting. The lead offshore technician typed frantically into the main deployment channel. Root access denied. System is repeatedly requiring a Level 1 authentication code to proceed with the core database transfer. Please advise. They were violently slamming headfirst into the zero-trust firewall. The architecture was actively locking them out, demanding the physical insertion of my proprietary hardware key to validate the hostile takeover. I held my breath, staring at the blinking cursor. This was his final exit ramp. If Vance actually read the error log, if he paused his victory lap for just 60 seconds to consult any senior engineer in the building, he might have realized the catastrophic magnitude of the wall he was crashing into. Instead, less than 30 seconds later, Vance typed a rapid, incredibly annoyed response directly into the main channel from his phone. "It is just a standard legacy handshake protocol," Vance commanded. "Do not halt the migration sequence. Force the manual override. The database will automatically synchronize once the webinar initiates. Just make sure the client-facing dashboard looks completely clean for the demonstration." He swatted away the ultimate, final safety mechanism like it was nothing more than a minor, irritating bug on his windshield. He was so completely blinded by the spotlight waiting for him on stage that he cheerfully, arrogantly, ignored the absolute deafening alarm bells ringing inside his own control room. The trap was locked. The timer was counting down. All I had to do now was watch him pull the trigger. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the high-definition broadcast went live. I was logged in from my terminal, occupying one small rectangular box on a massive, perfectly orchestrated virtual grid. The gallery view was a veritable who is who of corporate power. In the top row, the entire Vortex Meridian Executive Board sat in their respective leather chairs, looking incredibly pleased with themselves. Right below them were the senior technical directors and vice presidents from Apex Medical, their faces blank and professional, waiting to see the future of their $14 million infrastructure. Occupying the main speaker view, dominating the screen, was Vance. He was broadcasting directly from the company's multi-million-dollar media room, standing in front of a massive, wall-to-wall digital display that currently featured a soothing, minimalist blue background. He looked absolutely radiant, practically vibrating with the manic energy of a man who believed he was cementing his legacy. He wore a brand new, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, and he spoke directly to the camera lens with the practiced cadence of a seasoned politician. For the first 15 minutes, Vance delivered an absolute masterclass in corporate vanity. He paced smoothly across the stage, gesturing grandly to the digital charts appearing behind him. He spoke passionately about the heavy, burdensome anchors of the past and the brilliant, streamlined aerodynamics of the future. He actually had the audacity to throw a slide up on the board detailing the millions of dollars in operational costs he was single-handedly saving the company. He proudly declared that Vortex Meridian was completely eliminating the bloated, obsolete personnel layers that had historically slowed down innovation. It was a beautiful, soaring speech about efficiency, completely devoid of substance but engineered perfectly to make the board of directors salivate. Then, he arrived at the grand finale. The moment of the live transition. Vance stopped pacing. He turned his body slightly, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward the camera, addressing me directly in front of the entire executive audience. His voice dripped with a nauseating mix of manufactured camaraderie and absolute authority. And now, to officially usher in this incredible new era of automated security, Vance projected smoothly, his voice echoing through the high-fidelity audio feed, I am going to ask our legacy data architect, Lila Sanchez, to initiate the final digital handshake. Lila, if you would be so kind as to press the final approval on your end, our brand new global systems will seamlessly take 100% control of the Apex medical data pipeline. He smiled, a bright, camera-ready flash of white teeth. He was giving me the privilege of pushing the button that made me obsolete. He wanted me to dig my own professional grave on a live broadcast. I reached out and clicked the mouse, unmuting my microphone. I leaned slightly forward, ensuring my face was perfectly centered in the high-definition lens. I smiled back at him. It was not a tight, polite corporate smile. It was a genuine, warm, utterly relaxed expression of pure peace. And then, I said absolutely nothing. I held my tongue for exactly 5 seconds. In a normal conversation, 5 seconds is just a pause. But on a live, heavily orchestrated corporate broadcast with dozens of executives staring at you, 5 seconds of dead air is an agonizing, suffocating eternity. It is a psychological vacuum. I watched the grid. The polite smiles on the board members began to falter. The Apex executives leaned closer to their screens, their brows furrowing in sudden confusion. Vance's blinding smile tightened, the edges of his mouth twitching as the silence dragged on, completely obliterating the momentum of his triumphant speech. He opened his mouth to prompt me again, a flash of genuine irritation finally breaking through his polished veneer. I did not give him the chance to speak. I reached down to my desk and smoothly lifted a crisp, white sheet of heavy stock paper into the center of the camera frame. The bold red ink of my physical signature stood out starkly against the white page. In my other hand, I held up a heavy brushed steel object. It was the physical master encryption key, the hardware token that served as the beating heart of the entire Apex medical infrastructure. I officially resign, effective this exact second, I stated. My voice was calm, crystal clear, and completely devoid of any hesitation. It echoed through the media room speakers, ringing out over the live feed with absolute terrifying finality. Before Vance could even process the words, before anyone on the board could gasp or mute their microphones, my office door swung open. Stepping perfectly into the camera frame behind me was a tall, incredibly serious-looking man wearing a nondescript gray suit and a laminated federal identification badge clipped to his lapel. This was the independent government auditor I had requested 2 weeks prior. He stepped forward, holding out a thick, transparent, tamper-evident evidence bag marked with heavy red federal seals. Without breaking eye contact with the camera, I dropped the master encryption key straight into the plastic pouch. The heavy steel token hit the bottom with a dull, hollow thud that was perfectly picked up by my microphone. The auditor immediately folded the top of the bag over, pulling the adhesive strip and sealing it shut with a loud, aggressive rip. The mechanical lock engaged. The chain of custody was instantly, legally transferred. The key was officially out of my possession, out of Vortex Meridian's control, and secured under federal oversight. The automated zero-trust protocols did not need a meeting to decide what to do next. The system recognized the immediate termination of the designated key custodian. It reacted with the brutal, unforgiving speed of a machine programmed to protect $14 million worth of medical secrets at all costs. On the live broadcast feed, the massive, soothing blue digital wall behind Vance violently glitched. The beautiful charts and the soaring profit projections instantly vanished. A horrifying, ear-piercing digital klaxon tore through the media room audio, forcing half the board members to rip their headsets off in sheer agony. The entire wall of screens behind Vance suddenly flashed to a blinding, aggressive crimson red. The color bathed Vance in a hellish, glowing light, completely washing out his expensive suit and his perfectly styled hair. Massive, bold white letters slammed onto the screen behind him, spanning 20 feet across the room, displaying a message that every single executive from Vortex Meridian and Apex Medical could read with absolute, undeniable clarity. Critical security error. Authorized custodian terminated. Zero trust lockdown initiated. All access denied. The automated future Vance had just spent 20 minutes selling had arrived, and it had immediately locked the doors, turned off the lights, and burned the entire building to the ground. The crimson light from the massive wall of screens washed over Vance, casting long, horrific shadows across his face. The heavy, soundproof oak doors of the executive media room were violently kicked open, the sound echoing like a gunshot over the live feed. The chief legal officer of Vortex Meridian, a man who usually moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predatory reptile, practically sprinted onto the broadcast set. His face was completely drained of blood, resembling the color of old, wet ash. He had just opened my automated email precisely at 8:55 in the morning. He lunged past Vance, ignoring him entirely, and started screaming wildly at the control booth technicians to immediately sever the physical power lines to the server racks. Down on the virtual meeting grid, the Chief Information Security Officer of Apex Medical slowly unmuted his microphone. His voice cut through the chaotic background noise of the media room like a surgical scalpel. He did not yell. He did not express anger. He simply stated, with bone-chilling, absolute clarity, that Vortex Meridian had just engaged in an unauthorized, entirely unvetted transfer of heavily restricted medical records. He explicitly noted that this action constituted a massive, inexcusable violation of federal cybersecurity statutes. Pursuant to the catastrophic breach of the Key Custodian Addendum, the Apex executive announced, his voice devoid of any emotion, "We are exercising our right to immediately terminate our master service agreement. Your $14 million contract is null and void, effective right this exact second." Vance completely lost his mind. The slick, wildly confident visionary instantly vanished, replaced by a desperate, sweating man violently cornered by the consequences of his own arrogance. He spun toward the camera lens, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my square on the grid. He began screaming frantically that I was actively sabotaging the infrastructure, that I was a bitter rogue employee committing an act of corporate treason. He demanded that security arrest me immediately, but I had already anticipated his pathetic cowardice. The very second my digital resignation took effect, a secondary, entirely automated script was triggered from my hidden drive. Every single board member, every senior vice president, and the currently hyperventilating chief legal officer simultaneously received a massive, decrypted data dump directly into their personal inboxes. It contained every single forced directive, every single demand to skip encryption checks, and every single arrogant message Vance had ever sent me. The indisputable, mathematically proven evidence of his gross negligence was suddenly sitting right in the hands of the very people he was so desperately trying to impress. The institutional fallout was unbelievably swift and totally absolute. Before the late afternoon sun could even begin to dip behind the Denver mountains, the company's stock price plummeted off a cliff, permanently evaporating tens of millions of dollars in shareholder value in a matter of a few short hours. Vance did not even get the opportunity to pack his expensive office belongings. Two incredibly large, unsmiling men from corporate security physically escorted him through the main lobby in front of hundreds of dead silent employees. He was not merely fired, he was being marched straight into the jaws of a devastating career-ending investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. But here is the final, beautiful piece of the puzzle that a man like Vance could never possibly comprehend. Apex Medical was not actually panicking. Their highly sensitive data was perfectly safe, locked tightly behind my impenetrable digital wall. The truth was, their senior executive leadership had privately reached out to me late the previous evening via a highly encrypted, untraceable channel. They knew exactly how incompetent Vortex Meridian had become under the new operational regime. They had watched the warning signs flashing for weeks. We had quietly, systematically orchestrated the entire controlled demolition together. The very moment they legally voided their existing contract with Vortex Meridian, their legal team already had a brand new, fully drafted agreement sitting on a mahogany desk, completely bypassing the bloated corporate middleman. I casually logged off the broadcast, permanently shut down my secure terminal, and picked up the small cardboard box containing my mechanical keyboard and my titanium thermos. The entire office floor around me was erupting into a state of absolute beautiful chaos, with managers sprinting down hallways and phones ringing off the hook. But I walked through the aisles completely unnoticed. As I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and finally stepped out into the crisp, clean Colorado air, I pulled my plastic employee identification badge from my belt and casually dropped it into a metal trash can on the street corner. Tomorrow morning, I would not be logging into a toxic corporate server. I would be waking up as the brand new lead independent security consultant, directly retained by Apex Medical. I would be managing the exact same architecture, doing the exact same job, but with zero corporate oversight and a new retainer fee that paid exactly 3 times my old salary. I walked away from the shattered, smoking ruins of an empire that burned to the absolute ground simply because a useless man in an expensive suit thought he was smarter than the woman holding the keys. Thank you so much for listening to the end of today's story. Where are you tuning in from today? Let me know in the comments below. If you found today's corporate takedown satisfying, please help us keep the channel alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish publicly on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code right now on your screen, or you can click the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Stay safe out there, and never let anyone take credit for your hard work.